Apresentações para dizer então, Hello.
Hey,
What's up? What's up?
Hello, everyone.
hey, how's it going?
Good.
Hello.
How is everyone?
Hi,
Not
everyone.
bad.
Excellent. Thursday has been going well.
Yes, so far.
Great. We're all in the right call, I think.
That's a good start.
I hope they fixed the Google Calendar.
Yeah, I think so. It looks like everything's aligned, so that's great.
I'm working to figure out the calendar. Part of the problem is that I don't have access to it, but Elisa does. And so I've been like going back and forth with her. I don't actually understand like where the source of truth is for it. So,
that's always fun.
It's a little bit of a mess at present, but we'll get it fixed. As per usual, the agenda file is the source of truth.
Yeah, that's a good way to have it. Yeah, it's the calendar reminder is, the event in the calendar really just means go check the agenda file.
Yeah, but it's tempting. It's so easy to just click on join.
I know.
So.
Yeah. Well, especially time change differences for folks outside of North America right now. That's been fun to navigate as well. So.
Yes.
Yeah, we're in like the weird week, right? Where various European and UK daylight savings offsets from US daylight savings by like a single week or 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's the weird period for sure.
So is the US still changing? Or
yeah,
we have
this weekend.
Okay.
Coming up.
Then it's again later because it's very early.
Yeah. Yeah, we change on the 6th on Sunday. Canada and US anyway.
Yeah. It's no wonder programmers hate dates and times.
Right?
It's even worse if you deal with historical time points.
Oh yeah. Well, we have epic time, nothing to worry about, you know. The world started in 1970, so
yeah, that's right. On the first day of 1970, God created Linux, and nobody remembers what happened before then.
That's right.
But even then, I saw a couple of these implementation for time objects in .NET, and it's like because there are changes, like somebody abandons maybe the daylight saving time, and then these are fixed switches in the code where you have to say until this date we calculated this way. And
oh, it's a mess. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Let's see. We're not actually expecting a huge crowd today, if the agenda file is accurate.
Yeah.
When you hear 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And how many do we have here?
I think we have everybody except for Matt.
We have 11?
Yeah.
We have, except Matt's not here.
I think it's Ivan. Ivan's here, not on the agenda, but Matt is on the agenda, not here. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. There's the Venn diagram overlap.
Yeah.
All right. We will kick things off then. And Yvonne, I'm assuming you're sending us the PR to get your name on the agenda file. All right, everybody. Happy November. Hope everyone had a good Halloween. Kicking things off. Of course, as we all join, we agree to the SPEC membership agreement, participation guidelines, contribution guide, code of conduct, all well-written documents from me and others. As per usual, we like to do a quick round the room of names to faces. We will go in the order listed in the agenda file. Anyone who's not in there yet, just chime in last. I'm at the top of that list as per usual. So hello, everybody. Good to be joining you all today. My name is Lee.
Hey, everyone. I'm Benji.
Hey, I'm Steven.
Your audio is not working, Michael. You're unmuted, but you're
Second mute switch, maybe?
or maybe your headset's not connected. This is the true reason why we do the names to faces, to make sure that
Test the
call
audio.
this the AV check phase of the meeting.
Is it working now?
It is.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm Michael from Telegram. Sorry to hold this up. I switched from my mobile to the laptop. So
Hi, I'm Uli from the guild. And Rob.
Oh, we missed you, Rob.
Hello, everyone. Oh, oops, I took your space, sorry. Sahaj, you're next.
Hi everyone, I'm Sahaj.
Hello, I'm Dennis.
Hi, I'm Matt from Meta.
Hi, all. Hugh here.
Hey, it's Derek from Follow.
Hi, it's Juan from Apollo.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for chiming in. We have a nice tight agenda today. Actually, before we get into that, we should make sure that we are in a healthy state with regards to the notes. I see at least 2 people in the notes. I'm assuming one of those is Benji, since it's literally up on his screen. Anybody else in the notes that is able to help take over, especially as Benji chimes in with discussion? I see 3 people in there now. I'll take that as oh, 4 people. All right, we got some people in there. These notes end up being incredibly helpful. So thank you, everybody, Benji in particular, for making sure that these come together well. Quick look over of the agenda. I think since we have a tighter agenda today, it's worth maybe spending a decent amount of time digging through our action items, making sure that we kind of prune the backlog. A well-deserved moment to bring the Express GraphQL project back up to date. Interesting discussion on deprecation of objects. And then, as per usual, I'm sure what will be a very excellent discussion on progress on defer and stream. Anything else you all want to talk about before we get to that? Or in addition to that?
Yeah, maybe just a quick question. How do people, since we've been through 1 full month of the new working group cadence, how have people found things?
so far, I would say it's good because it's smaller slots, which I actually find nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about the Australia spot yet, so let's see how we go through that. I hope there are more people joining in there, and as people learn in Australia that it's a thing now. But let's see.
Mm-hmm.
But Europe and the primary one is good because we essentially splitted the meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah, we had a healthy audience for that first Asia Pacific one.
Awesome.
Unsurprisingly, mostly folks from Australia, but I'm hoping that we can make a little bit more noise and see that pick up. But I think we had maybe 6 or 7 people in attendance on that meeting.
Yeah, let's give. Yeah, I think let's give it a bit time and make it would be good. Like Uri maybe from the guild, he has also a lot of contacts. I don't know if in Asia, but if we could spread the word a bit, I try to tweet it out that there is a meeting.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We can tweet it also. Are we using we can use the official GraphQL Twitter account?
Sure, I
definitely can.
I just mentioned you because you have a lot of connections to also maintainers in the project. So that might be, if you know of some in the Asian area.
Yeah, let's get that on the GraphQL Twitter. Maybe I'll tweet something about that later today, just to remind folks that we have the one coming up relatively soon. And just probably good to highlight that the first one went well. I'm realizing that one of the things that I should probably have as a fixed item on this primary one is sort of a recap of those other ones, since they are narrow audience. So I'll make sure that I get that set up for the next one. But since we're talking about meeting cadence, I might as well use that as an opportunity to do that. Actually, the first thing I should check in along there was last month's primary meeting. I wasn't able to attend. Benji ran the meeting. Any highlights from that? That go smoothly?
There wasn't many people in attendance, but yeah, it was fine. I think we actually shut it down a bit early compared to usual. But yeah, there was some interesting topics there. I'm afraid I haven't filed any of the action items, and to be honest, I've only recently got access to Zoom again, so I haven't uploaded the videos yet either. But that will be something that hopefully I'll get done in the next week or so, along with this meeting.
Okay. Do you have access to Zoom now?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Cool.
Glad to hear it. Well, I'm glad that it went smooth. The APAC secondary slot we had 6 folks on the agenda. I think that's the number of folks we actually had in attendance. Andy was very excited to be able to join again for the first time in a while. And he brought some of his crew with him that's been working on GraphQL Java. Unsurprisingly, there's a healthy amount of Australian folks who are working on that. We also had, I think, Michael, you happened to be in Australia.
Exactly.
For like unrelated reasons.
I was speaking at a conference also about GraphQL, but apart from that, I attended from that conference. So it was a good start for the first meeting, I think.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then props to Matt, who also joined. I think it was the weirdest time for you relative to everybody else, but
That's fine.
But the topic du jour of that meeting was custom scalars, and in particular, picking back up the GraphQL scalars repository and website, so that people have a place to put source of truth that has sort of like a moderate bar for access. And Donna and Andy had done a pretty decent job assembling like a minimum viable template for how you would assemble one of those, which looked great. So we'll see if there's progress between that last one and the upcoming one. I expect they'll want to talk about it. Yeah, go ahead.
It's already on the agenda, so the SCADA stuff is being picked up next time.
Yeah. We had a surprisingly well-attended secondary meeting last month. I wonder if there's just like enough people with conflicts for the first meeting last month that led to the overflow. But we had this like at least 11 people in the secondary meeting with a really healthy agenda. Incremental delivery, fragment modularity, which I don't know if we made as much progress as we hoped, but that was a super interesting discussion. I feel like the next one was struct, which feels like we're still in this like broadening phase of understanding the problem domain, but Mark had a really awesome discussion about SDUI. And then Alex came back with a client controlled nullability update for the first time in a while. And I think Stephen, we had your deprecation of objects pending, but we ran out of time. So we'll have ample time to talk about it today. The other thing that I just put on the agenda just now Oh man, where did my agenda file go? Is the next phase of the GraphQL community grant is launching. We've been sort of like trickling in submissions just as anyone, the form's just kind of always open, but we're gonna officially decide on granting a handful of these close to the end of this month so that we can get the process in flight for them to be funded, hopefully in December, at the beginning of next year at the latest. There is an initial tweet out. I'm planning on making some noise on the Discord about this. I want to make sure everybody here knows about it, especially because I imagine some folks here may want to apply, but certainly also if there's other channels that you want to advertise this. I think one thing that we did not do last time that could be quite interesting to consider this time is if there are projects that we want to sort of like Google Summer of Code style, if you want to propose a project, we could consider putting together like a repository is a big word, literally just like a section on the GraphQL Foundation website. It's just, here are things that we hope people apply to do. I think documentation in particular is something that needs a lot of love and would be a great use of community grants. Any thoughts on that? Any other channels we should be broadcasting this?
If we can maybe reach out to all of the maintainers that we have across all of the official GraphQL projects, maybe that would be a good way of doing it. Maybe we can set up a team or internal discussions or something that would work for that.
We do have that maintainers GitHub group that is sort of partially useful. That might be a reasonable place to do that. Or
how do you address them? Via email or?
There's actually I'm trying to think of where the right place on GitHub would be to put this. Like via GitHub discussion, probably.
But maybe also like often on Twitter, if we retweet it, if you do something as a Twitter announcement, because sometimes you oversee the GitHub stuff.
Yeah, that's true. It would be an interesting project to collect as much contact information around GraphQL core or just like main project maintainers as possible. Names and GitHubs and Twitters and all of that, just so that when we do want to do sort of like a big broadcast, we know how to reach people. Because yeah, we don't really have a great way otherwise, huh? Okay, I like the idea of doing additional retweets, but anyway, if anyone has additional ideas, I'm gonna open a GitHub discussion. Let me see if I can do that right now, actually, just so. Okay, we'll drop in.
We've used a tool at Apollo for doing something very similar, a DevRel tool called Orbit. I'll drop the link there if anybody wants to take a look at it, but it's really great at connecting to things like any kind of source, like GitHub is one of them. And you can really easily tag people that are pulled in from different repos to be lined up for communication in the future. So you could have a mail out, you could be tagging people as being GraphQL open source maintainers, for example, and then really easily send them communicate with them en masse. So it's really great at that.
Oh, very cool. I've not heard of this tool.
Yeah, it's a fairly recent startup, yeah.
Thank you for the link. Okay, I opened a discussion thread there, so if folks think of stuff or just want to coordinate where you're sharing it, feel free to put it there. Okay, Benji, I'll hand it to you to talk about Express GraphQL.
Did you want to look at the action items first?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, we jumped right ahead talking about new agenda items. Thank you for the reminder. Let's look at those first. As suspected, I don't think we have any tagged as ready for review, but it may be worthwhile just to do a culling. We have some that have been open for a really long time, and I'm wondering if we could just like close them as stagnant. So I'm going to look at actions that are open and sort by least recent change, because some of the, okay, so there's, it's the best way. Should I share my screen so we're all looking at the same thing?
Yeah, that'd be great, for sure.
Okay, let's do that. One sec. Okay. Here's the first, or the oldest. Is this one on me? This is a ancient topic. Okay, anyone opposed to me just starting to close out issues that are old, or any ideas on how we'd want to collect archived issues?
Maybe we can just tag them with like incomplete or no longer relevant or won't fix.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna do this. Archived is incomplete. We'll just close.
So just a heads up, like when you're closing it, you have an option to close as want complete instead of just closing as issue, like in a job down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, fairly recent addition, which is awesome.
I've not seen that before. Okay, very cool. I'm fairly certain that this one actually was closed because we merged in all of the Unicode spec changes. So that one is done. This is very relevant. We were literally just talking about this implementers team. Let's take a quick look at that. There's a fairly trim set. I guess that's just statuses. 17 folks in here. I wish there's a way for people to self-select to add them to these, because it's not really a great way to opt in. Anyway, just for sake of not losing this, where did that discussions thread go? I'm gonna drop that in the okay. I'm gonna close this for now. That one we're gonna leave open because that one actually is an open thread. This one is interesting. Now we're getting close to a year old, which is hopefully closer to our working memories. Oh, okay. I remember the source of this, Yvonne. I'm not sure if you remember this. There was this discussion about I think that Sasha may have brought this up. When we're doing field selection merging, that we threw errors around merging covariant fields. Instead, we required them to be invariant, or I mean the same. And there was an action to at least open an issue, if not a PR, to explore actually doing this.
It was Sasha back then. It's a couple months ago.
Yeah,
Ivan, do you have a? Go ahead.
Yeah, before we close it, it's actually related to another issue. Like this particular rule causing a lot of problems, including performance problems, and it's like one of the most complicated rules we have. At least like validation rule wise, it's the most complex rule. And it's like from time to time we have like some problem with it, with recursion in it, and with performance in it, some performance issue even like problematic. I think we received emails about it. I think Lee was included in emails thread about this particular rule about merging fragments, merging fields selection. So simplifying it, it's like solving big set of issues. One thing to be self-conscious about, we think, I think still it's important, but if anybody else want to take it on, especially like communicating with the clients and doing like particular research, I still can help like with the GraphQL JS implementation, especially since it's cutting out stuff and removing stuff. But if anyone wants to adopt it, I'm like, I will be happy. I just think it's like very important one.
That's about, just to recap that, Ivan, it's about if you have in two fragments the same field but with different types, right? Like we have a field foo in one. If it's type A, foo is an int. If it's type B, foo is a int, right?
Not exactly. It's about like we have requirements. It's connection between types. If inline fragments. So it's like disjoin. Do we allow disjoin types in response?
And
so
I remember Lee said that originally they had issues with the Java generator or something like this, and that's why they introduced actually the rule.
Yeah, I think so, and it's not only like ergonomic; it's rule is problematic. I would say we can try to fix it, and periodically we fix it, but it's adding a lot of complexity, unnecessary one, and potential problems.
Cool. All right. We'll leave this open for now. I'm just going to drop a note here that this is still open but worth investigating.
The validation thing is me.
Do you think we should leave it there, Lee? And we can come back to it at the end of the meeting, maybe?
Which one?
Just the other issues.
We've got
about an hour left.
Okay, fair. Yeah, let's get back to, because we've got, okay. Yeah, I think we'll probably use the hour for the last three. If we got more time, we'll go back to review, but let's, for the sake of time, keep moving. Benji, I'll hand the floor to you to talk about Express GraphQL.
Okay, I don't really have much to say on this topic. Elisa reached out to me and said that the GraphQL Foundation has been receiving a few queries about the Express GraphQL project. There's an issue thread on there. People are concerned that it doesn't support GraphQL 16, and there doesn't seem to have been a release on it for the last 2 years. And basically, Elisa says, we need to make a decision on it, whether we are still maintaining that project, whether that is still like the reference implementation of our HTTP serving of GraphQL, or whether this is a project that we should archive. Just wanted to gather thoughts on that.
I wouldn't archive it. We should, because it was for a long time the reference implementation, and I think especially with GraphQL HTTP with the HTTP spec on the horizon, this could be implemented there. Myself.
Matt, I saw your hand up for a sec.
Yeah, Michael actually hit exactly that. Like with the GraphQL over HTTP, that seems like that group seems like the logical group to own the Express GraphQL, and probably a sign of like, yeah.
Ivan, I know you have some things to say here, but Ivan has some time to work on the project to get it into better shape, but I think he'll talk about that.
Yeah, a little bit context. So what happened is we get like subscription merged, and after that, I felt some work necessary, and when it's fell through the crack of all other things happening in like my personal life and outside of project. Yeah, so we discussed for GraphQL.js, we discussed contingency plan. So what to do and how to have like everything not depend on a single person. And we have like solution. We have like reviewers team and it's like 5 people from different organization. It's like yes, who already contribute to JavaScript code, so like they can review and match stuff. So I added like a group to have admin access. So it's like now it's not only me and like some Facebook employee, previous Facebook employees. Now it's like the same 5 people from GraphQL.js have like merging rules. Also, I noticed one thing, important thing to distinguish between code ownership and people who participate in working groups. Some of them like happy to contribute like content, but is not familiar with JavaScript or don't have like a time to do code contribution and peer reviews. So if anybody from that group wants to do it, it's like super, especially like review if it contradicts specs or not. Actually, like part of the maintenance burden of this project was people constantly pushing for non-standard things, like return different error codes on different stuff, doing something non-standard. And GraphQL over HTTP spec is excellent for like answering that question. It's not like personal decision of anybody. It's like a document saying it should behave like that. So and another thing I noticed today, so after seeing it on agenda, I thought I will do like at least like low-hanging stuff, merge in and do release. So what I noticed, there is like previously it was like people contributing, and today I actually merged like I think 5 PRs from one person who did like a good job of cleaning like TypeScript types, tests, comments, like general cleanup. Code base is not huge. It's like I think like up to 1,000 lines of like server itself and a couple of thousand lines for tests. So I think like beyond giving more people like write access as fallback scenario for more people have an option to match, I think contacting like couple of people who contribute previously, multiply serial contributors, people who already know, especially like this guy today, I forget his like, you can look at the GitHub history for today and see like PR by PR merged by him. So I will write him a mail asking if he wants to participate. And I think it's fair since he contributed a bunch of stuff. So beyond giving more people right access, I think reaching to people who previously contributed, and also on GraphQL or CTP group, asking like people participate in that also to review and contribute will solve this issue. And beyond like 5 people to merge PR, we have like more chance that good pairs are getting merged.
I have maybe another point of view on this. So, I mean, we can, I'm happy I just saw also today that you merged like a couple of PRs. But the truth is, in the last 2 years, nobody touched the library. And also the library basically advocates for Express, which is, in many ways in the current JavaScript ecosystem is, slowly not necessarily becomes the default. Now, there's a question here of like, is the reference implementation actually needs to decide for you what node HTTP framework you use? And what do we actually want from a reference implementation? Now, you all mentioned the new GraphQL over HTTP working group. Now, part of that outcome of this working group is that Dennis here created a library that basically tests automatically each framework if they conform to the HTTP standard. So you can run that suite of tests and see if a framework actually like follows the spec or not. Now, if we look at the fact that we have now, let's say we have Apollo server, we have GraphQL Yoga, we have Mercurius, we have a lot of like good servers that are being up to date. They have really big communities around them. And then we have Express GraphQL that, again, like we can find all kinds of contributors to maybe put some time, maybe it will work, maybe it will not. But at the end of the day, because it's the official way of doing it, people might tend to go to use this framework, which I personally believe is a bad choice, and I wouldn't recommend anyone to use this framework compared to the other solutions that are out there, not because it's bad, but just because the current shape of it. And maybe we can pick it up, but maintaining a server framework for the long run is, I think, harder than just like finding a couple of volunteers. I'm asking myself, are we doing more harm by having it out there being the official way of reference implementation, even by the way that it's not necessarily following the spec compared to others that are already there. I will add also another context to that the last person that actually maintained that library was Daniel. And Daniel himself like stopped working on it. And actually, because he didn't actually was happy with the overall philosophy and architecture of it, and went on to build GraphQL Helix. So I think as basically his own vision to what, let's say, the reference implementation should be. So I believe that like by having all of these pieces, thanks to the fact that we have the GraphQL over HTTP group and that we have this suite of tests, we actually get what we need from a reference implementation. And by telling people that this is the official implementation, Express GraphQL library, I think we're actually making more harm than good. I think currently people that are going and using it, probably they're having bad experience compared to if they would use Apollo server, GraphQL Yoga, Mercurius, like libraries with a lot of community and a lot of documentation and a lot of support without finding volunteers. Like it's just there without any effort. Sorry.
The thing I think is that it's good that we have a testing library which is good. But it's also, I always find it valuable if you have like a reference implementation where you can see how the spec is applied. And if I look at servers like Apollo, they pack a lot more than the spec, like also Helix, a lot more than the spec. So it's more difficult to see if you implement your own server, what is really needed. Or it's the same with GraphQL JS. It's like a good thing to have a look, peek at it, how somebody implemented really the spec text. That's why I think it's valuable.
So I personally think that having like a reference implementation is good. That actually should stick to the spec, having me lightweight implementation. That being said, like asking for volunteers from community, that's could be hit or miss. So open source projects, sometimes they're very active, other times they're not. People lose interest, they move to other things, right? So in my opinion, it would be great if maybe like the foundation could put like some fund to actually pay someone to maintain it and keep it up to date. And basically,
we've got that community grant,
right?
Community grant's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, on top of that, I'd just like to add a few things about GraphQL HTTP, and also adding on what Michael said. I also share the idea that a reference implementation should not just be something that implements a specification. It should also be something that you can read code-wise and then basically have a picture of how you should implement it yourself anywhere else, not in the specific programming language you're looking at. So yeah, not to brag, but the GraphQL HTTP does exactly that. So the code is so minimal and it's completely server agnostic. You can run it anywhere from Cloudflare workers to Node. And it's basically written with this core idea in mind that you read it top down with the few hundred lines of code that you have there, and you can gain a sense of how you can approach the same implementation yourself inside JavaScript or elsewhere. And in addition to that, I basically went through the GraphQL over HTTP specification and extracted the details like the musts and the shoulds and created an actual test suite of all over that. So talking about the volunteering part, I already did it and in a sense where we already have part of it and we already have a working thing that you can plug in your own server, being Express or something else, and basically can be maintained from that point on. I also agree about the point that the name Express GraphQL brings this association to the Express framework, even though it doesn't depend on it. There is no dependency on Express itself, and it is also like kind of a older approach in terms of like people associating it with these older frameworks like Express, and also it being updated so long time ago. And I think that it would be a harder approach on actually maintaining or bringing this project back to life, seeking out volunteers instead of just doing it like brand new, like I did with GraphQL HTTP. So it like we evolved as a community in GraphQL wise and also JavaScript wise, and the capabilities of what you can do nowadays are much greater than what you could when you started with just using Express. So I think this fresh takes is something that like is necessary to keep it in line with the reference implementation and GraphQL over HTTP. And yeah, I'm willing and I'm already doing it, kind of like following what we are doing because I'm a part of the other work group as well. And every breaking change or things alike, I immediately reflect in the test suite as well as in the reference implementation. So like also being a monarch in that sense, I basically have full control and I don't have to wait for somebody else, and I try keeping it in line because yeah, it's something I like doing actually. So yep.
Okay, I think we have the right input. So some things here are clear. One is there's a bunch of people using Express GraphQL today. That's like the main thesis of that issue was like, hey, there's all these dependencies. Can we make sure that these don't break? So that doesn't necessarily mean we have to support it forever. Either we have to support it to some degree in the short term. Thank you, Yvonne, for merging some pull requests. At a minimum, we need to have sort of like a healthy exit plan for it. Like, what does it look like to migrate from this to something else? Or do we just shim Express GraphQL on top of GraphQL HTTP or something like that? There needs to be some kind of plan. There's something there. Strongly agree with what you're saying, Dennis, about sort of the goals of a reference implementation should also be used. I would add that in addition to your criteria. And I think GraphQL HTTP is. Ultimately, someone just needs to own this and own the space. And my sense is the best case scenario for that is the person who owns this and owns the space also is one of the people who's deep in the weeds of the GraphQL HTTP work. Dennis, if you're volunteering to be that, then I think the right thing to do is to like officially anoint you the delegated lead to pick up anything related to GraphQL HTTP on the implementation side and assemble a plan, and we'll put our trust in you to make sure that that rolls smoothly.
Yeah, cool. I'm more than willing. And also like Express-wise, what you said about shims and whatever not. So GraphQL HTTP itself can also bundle like optionally parts that includes it inside existing frameworks like Fastify and Express, and also does that in this framework idiomatic way of how they do this. Actually, I do this with a separate library, GraphQL WS, where you can plug it into different servers, and the core product, the core library is just like a way of coercing messages and giving you responses. So I don't think that the movement from Express GraphQL, especially having this in mind, won't be of much friction. Yeah, you can just like switch it up. We can also create a migration plan or things alike, but yeah, I don't think it will be like that big of a deal, honestly.
Let's go.
Yeah, I know we're over the 5 minutes here on this topic, but just two quick questions. One, does that mean that GraphQL HTTP needs to become a foundation-owned project, or what is our stance on that? Would the foundation have a reference implementation for something if it's not foundation-owned?
I would strongly suggest if one of the decisions here, and Dennis, I think this is more up to you, is there's ambiguity about what is actually the reference implementation. Is it Express GraphQL? Is it GraphQL HTTP? I would prefer to delegate that decision. And Dennis, if you're the one who has the most context to make a call, along with a handful of other folks who've been working on this, great. But I think it does make a lot of sense that the reference implementation would live within that GraphQL org, which hopefully should not change in any way your ability to manage it. It's just a matter of sort of where it lives.
Yeah, the thing is only that I really don't care where it is, but I want to have, maybe this is hard wording and hard phrasing of it, I want to have ultimate ownership of it. So I want to change code as I like. Of course, not in terms of breaking stuff, but it wouldn't be that nice like to have it taken away in a sense, because it's a part of this GraphQL Foundation thing, and others can, from the foundation itself, push things into it without having like an agreement from my side or a review or something like that. So I'm just a bit annoying about how the code lives and how structures. I think we all are. And if there can be a guarantee about this monarch approach towards the code base, even though it lives under the foundation's organization, I really don't care where it is, honestly.
I mean, in most cases, there's one person who owns these things. Most people just contribute. So I would be okay with it. But it would also give it a much more official.
Yes, I completely agree on that point. Yeah.
I would be.
There are some tactical changes, like it would become like technically governed by the our technical steering documentation. You can look at that. They're listed at the top of the agenda file anyway. And so in that sense, like the true ownership piece is there. But in terms of the like how you want to operate it, I'm 100% with Michael. So really what we're talking about is the difference between 0 maintainers and 1 maintainer, not like 1 versus N. And so if that means that you want to, I think it is a very good that you would have sort of a vision and a code review process and everything. Those all sound like very healthy elements by my eye.
Cool. I like the sound of that.
I wonder, like, so I would say 2 things. First of all, it looks like we have here something that acts as a test suite and a reference implementation. I guess by now going and updating Express GraphQL, I think we might actually send the wrong message to the community that it's still maintained. Whether I believe it will probably, like many other stuff, won't be in a couple of months. So I would suggest to actually send a very clear message on Express GraphQL library itself that is it not maintained and is not aimed to be maintained. Because I believe that a lot of people are using it right now and are suffering. So that's one thing I think we should also decide on here. About moving to the foundation, this is a different thing and I don't want to take the discussion here, but I wonder what's the fear of people putting it in under the foundation, because it looks like that project lives very well. I mean, I'll say from our, this is Dennis's project, but I'll just say a small philosophy that we have in the guild that might be related here. And this is my personal thought. A lot of foundation projects are moving slow because there's no, for all kinds of reasons and good reasons. And here we have a project that moved very quickly and I believe answered everything that was needed. And it looks like no one has currently, at least, negative feedback on. So what I would suggest is maybe we can always, that project is MIT. So what I would suggest is once, let's say we have some members here in the foundation would say, okay, let's say this is the project is under Dennis, and now Dennis has done something that we disagree with, we can always at that point fork and move it to the foundation. But I believe what we are losing when we're taking this project that Dennis has built and put a lot of time and effort in, and keeps putting a lot of time and effort in, by moving into the foundation is basically losing one thing, giving him a little bit of the credit and the stuff that he deserves. So I believe that in order that, but there are also some benefits of moving into the foundation. One is like, I guess, telling people that this is the official one, but we also have other solutions for that. And the other thing is like, what happens if Dennis goes wrong? Does two things that the foundation doesn't disagree with. I think at that point, when that will happen, we can always put it back to the foundation as it's MIT and we can do it then. So that's just my suggestion. And the reason I'm suggesting it, I think that I worry about projects continuing to be maintained for the long term. And many times, the force for it is the person that actually does the work. So I'm sure Dennis is happy to lend it to the foundation, but I'm just, I know he wouldn't ask for something like that to keep it under his name. So that's why I'm saying it, because maybe he's not even feeling ready to say it or something.
I think our goal should be to make this as valuable a process as possible. If we feel like things get lost when projects become part of the foundation core, then that is not a good place for us to be in. So my intent would be, first of all, let's keep the credit, add something to the top of the README file that says main maintainer is Dennis, so that it's super clear. And then, the being part of the foundation, it gives you credibility and it gives you, and the community especially, a safety net. There's then clear sort of rules of engagement for how to engage with the product or with the project, which hopefully, Dennis, you agree with all of them. If you don't, then we should talk about it. But hopefully that ends up being just sort of pure value. And I think the main reason why projects move slow is that they don't have impassioned primary maintainers. And that is actually a quite good thing for us to hold on to. Just because the project is part of the foundation core does not necessarily mean that it can survive without a core maintainer. That's the primary reason why Express GraphQL has landed itself in the position it is now, which is we've had, a very reasonable dereliction of duty in this case.
And I think it's actually giving you more credentials. That's my thought. This is really if it's private, if it's under just Dennis, we might point there, but it never feels like this is the way you should implement it. This is a reference implementation. I think it gives you more credentials, and think like with GraphQL.js and Ivan is doing there a lot. And I don't feel that you're taking credit away. I mean, most people that look at GraphQL.js know that Ivan is doing a ton of work there. And I think the same for Dennis. I mean, Dennis anyway has so many components in the GraphQL space. So he has a lot of credentials. I don't think that's an issue.
Cool. And for the sake of time, I think we should, if there's extra discussion here, we'll move it to a discussions thread. But it sounds like we have a really great course of action here, which is basically Dennis giving you more reign of authority over an additional project. And I agree with Yuri that the right thing to do there is, if the decision is the GraphQL HTTP is the source of truth, then we need to make that very clear and have a migration plan, or like if you're part of the community that's using Express GraphQL and you're frustrated, you should have a clear sense of why this is a good thing. Okay, on to the next, Stephen, deprecated objects.
All right. So there is a PR to the spec that is linked there. You know, some folks have commented in there. I wanted to first just kind of, you know, give the use case that, you know, what are we trying to solve here? And let's see, go ahead and share this. There we go. So we have a common schema example where we have some animals, and we have an interface that is animal, and we have a dog that is a canonical animal. And then we also have a baiji, which is a Chinese river dolphin. And so then, you know, the problem is that, you know, baiji has not been spotted in the wild in 20 years. It's thought to be extinct. And so our server isn't going to be handling this type anymore. And so what we would like to indicate to clients that in their queries, they shouldn't be spreading on the baiji type, because as long as clients are spreading on this, you know, even if the server is not returning it, you know, it's got to be in the schema. And also, you know, for clients, they're implementing something unnecessarily. You know, they're generating code and they're writing code to handle this baiji that we know is not going to be returned anymore. And so now moving on to you know, solution, we could mark the baiji type as deprecated. And so, you know, basically what this means from the spec perspective is that, you know, we take the deprecated directive and we add that this can also exist on an object. And so that's basically it. You know, what does this mean when you put it on an object? You know, the idea is this indicates to clients that they shouldn't be spreading on this. And then this could also drive then, you know, client tooling to, you know, to let them know they don't need to be spreading on this. Code generation does not need to be, you know, handling this type anymore. And then, you know, the main thing that then I think comes to mind as far as gotchas with this solution is that, you know, in this case, we're talking about a type that is only exists as part of an interface. It's never referred to directly in the schema. And so, you know, if we're just saying you can deprecate any type, it does get a little bit weird if you try to deprecate a type that then is referenced in the schema directly. And so in the PR, I just put like I put a should not statement, like you shouldn't do that. Like that's confusing to deprecate a type, but then have undeprecated fields that are, you know, referring to it. Now, if we could make that stronger language, it'd be pretty easy to, you know, to validate that. But that's, you know, one point of discussion. And then another point is that in the spec PR, you know, so there's other alternatives as far as ways we could address this use case that would be, you know, slightly different. So I'll leave it at that. Thoughts? Go ahead, Matt.
This is interesting. I guess like the reason for deprecation in the first place, and maybe pointing at something that's a silly thing to poke at, but just to make sure that it's clear. The original reason for introducing the deprecated directive was simply removing that thing would be a client-side breaking change. Like if you have a field and you're like, that field, I don't want people to use it anymore, but it's already listed in a bunch of queries. If you deleted the field on the server, you'd fail the queries for all those existing clients, which you can't do. So deprecation allows you to stop using those in new queries and flag it. Is this a similar case where simply removing the object from a union or removing the object from, or removing an interface from that object that you were deprecating, like essentially untying it from the rest of the schema directly without using deprecation, does that create a similar breaking change?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it does just because of validation. So that, if we receive a query and the client is spreading on type that isn't part of the union, isn't part of the interface, we're gonna servers are gonna reject that query.
Yeah, that exact case has happened where people, where I've definitely seen people removing types that cause breaking changes, or remove types even just from an interface, and that causes a breaking change.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. The fragment spread itself is the thing that should you remove or change a type relationship, that fragment spread all of a sudden fails validation.
On top of this, I do think the making it a must that a non-deprecated field cannot reference this type rather than a should would make this a lot stronger, and adding that as an actual validation rule, like just another pass over the schema. Every type that is deprecated must not be referenced by a non-deprecated field, because if you're going to go through this process, you want to be able to have clients that 100% know exactly where all of their bad usages are, and not having that, I think, messes that process up.
Yeah, especially since right now there's this, deprecation is relatively narrow at the moment, but there's this idea that if you take your schema and then literally remove everything that is deprecated, you end up with a valid subschema. And so if you had a non-deprecated field that referenced a deprecated object, if you removed that object, you now have a field that doesn't reference a return type anymore, and that is broken. So I think if that's a rule that we want to hold to, which I think we should, because that's how that is how introspection works currently, which is you have to opt in to receive the deprecated things, which means if you don't opt into those, you need to make sure that you get a valid schema back.
Do we have, I don't have it off the top of my head, do we have the rule that if a field is deprecated on a type, that it must also be deprecated on any interface?
Oh, that's a good question.
No, we don't have this rule.
Sounds like another PR. Probably should, right?
Yeah, that seems like something missing. I'm surprised that hasn't come up, especially within Facebook schema.
I'm sure it has, but I suspect the reason it doesn't is because interface fields tend to be hack or PHP, like the like everybody gets the exact same implementation usually. Like literally the same code is executed, but so when you deprecate that, it just applies everywhere to everyone.
Well, sounds like we've got a good side action to solve then. Hopefully that's an easy
The other
one.
thing is that we don't do a great job of cleaning up our deprecated fields. So like we always include all deprecated fields because we can't not, basically.
Yeah, fair enough.
So another consideration for kind of stronger validation around this, at runtime, should a server be allowed to return a deprecated object as part of a union or interface? Or should that be like a runtime error?
Yeah, that's really interesting because so far deprecation is about what the client can ask for, which means we have not needed a mechanism like that. This would be the first time that should a client try to make sure that they're only using non-deprecated values, if a server was to respond with that.
So I don't think you can. I don't think it's possible to say the server cannot respond back with this deprecated type because you can have a field that returns the deprecated type. You can have a deprecated field that returns the deprecated type, right? And it is only like you can have a non-nullable field that returns this deprecated type. And so you must, in that case, return something. You just have to stub it out, like, because there are old clients in existence that must get some shape back.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be able to accept it through an interface or union spread, right? Only if you're referencing the type, the concrete type directly.
Mm-hmm. So put another way, is this, by marking it deprecated, is this a promise to the client that, that this won't appear in the union anymore?
One thing to note is that we make no promises that you won't get unexpected types in a union or interface. So, right, basically clients need to be future compatible with future servers. So in some sense, this just makes it the same as any other future type. So I'd be pretty comfortable with, you might get it, but your client, like we're trying to get rid of it over time. So your client should like be robust to getting this new, or this like no longer known to the client value that fulfills the interface or fulfills the union. But like we're going to be working over time to reduce how often that happens until it's zero.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, there's not a observable difference between, if you're a client that has intentionally shed itself of anything that is deprecated, is only looking at the subset of the schema that is not deprecated, then getting a value of some type for a particular interface that it isn't aware of, that could be an old value that was deprecated. That could also be a new value that was added recently since that code was built and deployed. And that's the same. Okay. I think that makes sense.
So, so where would we put this as far as RFC or phase at this point?
I think this is phase one because there's clearly some big open questions to answer. However, the problem as defined is a very real one, which is like this is a real way in which people have tried to do schema evolution that is not possible to do without creating breakages. Great. I added that label, but let me know if anybody disagrees with that.
And then, so next steps to get to phase two for this RFC, we we mentioned some specific things, changed the wording to must as far as returning from deprecated fields. Yeah, there's specific things.
So for phase two, what you need is we need a consensus that the direction is correct. So I think there's some open bits around exactly how its inclusion in interfaces and unions work. It seems reasonable that if I don't know, there's some quirkiness around how you want to interpret the implementation of an interface and inclusion in union relative to a type that is deprecated. So that probably needs some noodling and making sure that it's something that we all agree is the right one. The spec should be fully formed. So anything that you need in terms of shoulds or musts and validation rules and everything needs to be there. And then making sure that you've got a reference implementation, at least a PR that's fully formed. Doesn't have to be merged yet, but just you basically proven that you can. It's very reasonable to implement this, and you haven't like uncovered something new in the process of trying to build it. That would be stage two. Sweet.
Cool.
Steven, anything else you need?
I think that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for digging into that. All right. I think we'll likely use the rest of our time to talk about defer and stream. Rob, on to you. You are muted, Rob.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So in the primary October meeting, we talked a little bit about defer and stream and subscriptions. It was raised a couple times that subscriptions would combine with defer and stream is definitely not like the strongest use case, where as opposed to queries is definitely something that people want a lot more. And combining defer and stream with subscriptions brings up the problem, not necessarily a problem, but we have a stream of responses and we're multiplying it by another stream of responses. And I think there's different ways that could be handled. So the question that I want to raise is, should we basically not include this in the defer stream proposal we have now and move it to another proposal in the interest of moving the main one along faster? So we talked about a few different options for that in the last meeting, didn't really get a consensus on the way to move forward. But one thing we could do is add a validation rule that will reject any query that's a subscription that has defer and stream in it. I think the downside here is that if you have a fragment that you're using with a query and you want to include it in a subscription, you can't anymore. Yeah, maybe that could be, maybe you can work around that, or you could raise a field error if that happens. Now you're going to get an error during the execution phase instead of validation because validation doesn't have access to variables. But if you do include these deferred streams in a fragment that's in a subscription, you can disable them with the if variable. The if argument on the, you could disable it with the variable using the if argument on defer or stream. Yeah, and basically like the main thing that brought this up was the question of should we be multiplexing these payloads, whereas my implementation that I have now is basically waiting to drain all of the responses from one subscription event until you get the next event. That could cause a backlog if your resolvers take longer than it takes you to get new events. That is a problem we have now. It doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't try to solve it. But the last two options are we move forward with what we have now. That means when we do try to solve multiplexing, it's kind of something that you have to opt into, or we do try to solve this multiplexing concern and hold up the rest of defer and stream until that problem is solved. Yeah, so I want to get your guys' thoughts on that.
Maybe just high level question is how much open threads and potential for churn is there in continuing down the path of multiplexing? I think I agree that is the good long-term state, but if you think that is on its own a very significant proposal with a lot of iteration required, then I think you're right to consider punting it.
It hasn't really been explored very much. And I definitely think that there could be some like workshopping, bike shedding on it. It would probably need some new information added to the response shape, which would have to go into the spec of how the different responses are correlated. Or it could even just be left up to the transport entirely. But like those are the type of questions that we have to start digging into.
Yeah. So it's entirely possible that it's introduced in a way where someone's subscription implementation, even though the spec describes it, they can't, like there could be a mode in which a particular implementation can do streaming via queries and mutations, cannot actually do streaming via subscriptions, even though we happen to have specified behavior. And in that scenario, they would still need some described behavior.
Right. So the spec should even if we do allow subscriptions, when that is the case, the spec should describe like what is a compliant server that supports it on queries and mutations, but not subscriptions.
Yeah. Okay. I feel pretty strongly that we should not make stream and defer all or nothing. Like, I think it is reasonable to suggest, even between queries and mutations, like it may be the case that your particular implementation has constraints on how payloads are treated for a mutation that differ from a query. Can't think of exactly why, but it's entirely possible that someone comes across that as a scenario. And so if an implementer is forced between enabling streaming for queries, mutations, and subscriptions, or none, then that's a rough position to put an implementer in, because if they can turn it on for queries, and that unlocks value, and they cannot turn it on for the other two, or one or the other two, then that seems like an important thing for us to get right. And which is a subtly different thing from what you're saying, which is like, I think we should eventually get something that looks like your option 3. But even if we did have that, I think we probably still want to have well-defined behavior in the scenario where you turn it on for queries, you turn it off for subscriptions.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a huge fan of using validation rules to get incremental wins when the behavior of what you really want to achieve is not yet figured out. For instance, we could easily, in the spec, we could have a directive that's like, defer stream enabled that goes on your query, goes on your subscription, goes on your mutation, or disabled, right? And until the spec, like on the server, you could declare, hey, I currently only support defer stream on queries. And then we just have a generic validation rule for if that directive is or is not on, depending, then defer and stream. If we find any defer stream underneath that root operation type, it's not valid.
I think the same. I feel the same way, because the validation rule also gives you like syntax errors, like in GraphQL or wherever you type it, you already get feedback before you send it to the server. I'm not a fan of a field error in that way, because then you have to try out if it works or not. And yeah, I support that.
I think the tricky part with the validation rule is that there is this like additional, at least presently unknown piece of information that we would need to add to introspection in order to do it with validation, which is, does the server support streaming for a query and for a subscription, et cetera? Because a validation rule would need to know that to know if it was valid or not valid.
I think though that's a reasonable thing for us to include. We could do it with, like, if we added directive on the like root query mutation subscription kinds. That would be one opportunity. Another would be just like, right, if we do it in introspection. The advantage of it is we have a whole bunch of old servers right now that do not support it, and it would be useful for clients to know, hey, the server I'm hitting, like, sure, I could, like, it seems weird to have like a at defer in a query going to a server that cannot possibly support it.
Well, so what I am concerned about with the validation rule is this case of sharing fragments. Does happen a lot for us with Relay. We have like these large fragments that correspond to a component that has many subfragments, and it would basically prevent you from using defer in your query if now you can't also spread that fragment into your mutation.
But it said in Relay, I mean, the fragment is bound to a component, right? And typically, that's how we do it. We have like a much smaller footprint for subscription. I mean, you're not having the same fragment that you often use in your query, because that's if you think about like high frequent payloads, then you're sending all this data that doesn't change. So you most often have a much smaller footprint that you ask for the subscription.
Yeah, we would get in at Meta. We would get into the problems that Rob is explaining. We definitely have a lot of fragments that are both deferred and shared between subscriptions and mutations, and that is a very common thing. For a client like Relay, a relatively straightforward answer is Relay has a compiler. Strip them out. Right. If you're in a subscription, the query that you are sending to the server, strip them out beforehand.
Yeah, Apollo client, we don't have a compiler, so we wouldn't be in quite the same boat, but we can give a dev time warning when people do that, so they'd catch it during development. So we have an answer there as well.
How would the user address it without a compiler though?
It would be manual. They would have to know to do it. So it'd be like a developer experience story where we have to explain that's just a limitation right now that they'd have to work around.
But it also is impetus for somebody to come in and like it's impetus for somebody who keeps running into this problem to solve the subscription problem so that they can.
Yeah, it is.
So that's not a bad thing.
I know we're almost out of time, but do we at least all agree though that there is an avenue here where it's option 1 or 2 or something similar where we can move to first stream ahead without subscriptions though? I don't know if we've ever really at least tunneled in on that being the option we should start to explore more.
Yeah, because there's so much good stuff already there that we could pack in the next spec, and that would enable so many people to do amazing stuff that I also would.
Yeah, and we have some real usage data. We have some real usage data right now too from people using it. And I know the guild has had people using it, I'm sure, across their projects as well. And the edge cases, well, not necessarily edge cases, but the number of times people have brought up any issues with subscriptions have been 0 because they're just not thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the not thinking about it that I'm worried about. I think this is why I wanted to frame the problem rather than framing it as like, does this block our ability to ship? Frame it as, in the scenario where we ship both, would someone come to the realization that they actually, like they themselves need to come to some answer for this question because they can't turn it on for subscriptions? And if they did, what would they do? And in that case, we should just offer specified behavior anyway. And if doing that then allows us to parallelize a little bit where we could actually ship the first version of this that works for non-subscriptions, and then ideally fast follow, or, you know, hopefully when exploring the multiplexing stuff, it ends up being a little more or a little easier than we hoped it would. And then it ends up going smooth. But I see this more as like making sure that we have well-defined behavior for the scenario where even when we do have an answer to multiplexing and the behavior for subscriptions, you could still opt out of that element independently and have good behavior. I'm actually coming closer to this option 2, which is an execution phase error, which doesn't rule out the ability for a tool like, basically, like, you know, we've been talking about the Apollo client and Relay having these compilers, which give it the ability to add in extra bits and pieces. You can add in extra validation or like lint style rules. So you could also say like, hey, you know, I noticed that you were following this, you know, you're expecting a stream to happen from the consequences of subscription. Like that won't work for this particular reason. And if you were going to strip them out anyway, then I don't know if that's all that different. But I certainly agree that the validation, like untangling how to figure out how to get around that validation rule would be very non-obvious. And knowing when to apply it and when not to apply it outside of the context of the server domain is also non-obvious. So it would be hard for a tool like GraphQL to know to flag that in advance without more information than we currently share. And option 2 is on the front of like best possible DevX, slightly worse because you're getting a runtime error rather than a developer time error. But it does seem like this simpler unblocker, and then leverages the if clause, which like we could literally add language to the error message that says, if you're hitting this stream from a path that doesn't support it, use if to turn it off.
Another thing, the server can optimize and ignore defer. So we were okay with that. Why not the server just ignores it for subscription then? And then executes it like normal. Like essentially the server strips it out of subscriptions. Could also be an approach.
Yeah, I forgot to list that here. We did talk about that in the prior meeting.
Okay.
I think at that point it's questionable then. It's like, is it a breaking change if you had this subscription with the deferrer stream that was always ignored all the time, but now it does actually start happening? Is that a breaking change for clients?
You're right.
Yes,
it would be. It could be, depending on how your clients implement it.
We can't specify how it's going to work in the future. So like a client can't do anything other than
we still need to have some definition of in the scenario where you don't, like it should always be safe to have some kind of phase of not respecting it, I think. But certainly like the forward compatibility story there is less good than the first two options, which is ignoring it in a subscription until one day all of a sudden you start getting multiplexing down and none of your existing clients know how to handle that kind of payload would be not good.
Because what we are at the moment looking at for hot chocolate is like, it's very easy with 2 streams and 1 defer to produce like, I was very easy to produce over 3,000 patches from a simple query. And we're also looking into, from the security side at the moment, how can you prevent people really using that in a nefarious way against your server, defer and stream. And that's also like, there's some calculation where you then ignore the first. Essentially, some parts will no longer be deferred because they actually would harm the server. And these are also aspects where the client has to deal with then different patches. So the client shouldn't be fixated on patches. Actually, that's my reason. So it should deal with different patch sizes that it gets, or different kinds of patches. So it's not necessarily that the client can expect that it gets a certain shape of patches. So it could also be okay if we skip the things and then suddenly they came, because the client specified, I want this deferred, and then the server just determined, okay, that's actually not in the best interest of us both to give you that defer. So I give it to you in a different shape.
Okay, I know we're at time. Rob, sounds like you have at least directionally correct feedback here, which is, yes, this seems like a problem we're solving. And if this allows you to punt on multiplexing short term, then if that's valuable, then that's valuable. I think maybe you can explore a little bit about like what's the best way through how to apply the disabling.
Okay, so
right,
we're still not clear on option 1 or option 2, I think.
I don't have a strong opinion. My bias is towards 2 because it's simpler, but like I think you're getting mixed feedback here.
I'm the same and opposite. So I like, if you, Rob, have a strong opinion and build something, I think that will bias us towards action.
Yeah.
Right, the good news is
I do already have a PR to go with option 2.
But the good news is we've narrowed this down a little bit, though. It sounds like we are leaning towards it's okay to separate subscriptions out from this. So at least we can start to think about a future without option 3 or 4. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. We get to punt on 3 and 4 until the future, where we get to decide what is subscriptions and stream together, multiplexing, that whole ball of wax for a future topic.
And one last little thing to throw in there, if we do not allow subscriptions, and we're very public about that when this gets into the specification, we can footnote that very publicly with, hey, if this is important to you and subscriptions, come and get involved and join the working group meetings and help us out. So there's a really good community story there.
I'm into it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, folks. Thanks for the great discussion. Looking forward to seeing y'all relatively soon.
Great. Thanks all. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.